We have a massive expansion of renewables, a massive expansion of Bitcoin miners connecting to the grid to provide that flexible load balancing. But say the Bitcoin price crashes to a really low price, it gets to the point where some of these miners can't actually profitably mine. Do we then lose the load balance? Like, does the Bitcoin price have to stay at a certain price to make this work?
Yeah. So there's a lot of, it's healthy for these kind of pullbacks to happen. And so like in power generation, again, it's like whenever load drops, right, the most uneconomic generator comes offline. And so it's very healthy for us to have these kind of essentially drawdown times where you find out kind of which of the miners are uneconomic and shouldn't be essentially online anymore because they're using an inefficient kind of miner. And so think about how in the early days, people were mining on their laptop.
Yeah.
And, essentially nobody can mine on their laptop because it's not profitable. Like it would cost, it's no way. So that's forever gone, right? And so then in 2017, some of these miners at the time were making, this S9 miner was making $450 an hour, right? And in 2020, it went all the way down to 27, 28, right? And so what happened was, some of the miners came off the network, which was very healthy, and you find out kind of which ones are efficient and who's kind of who is swimming naked, right? And then you find out, then there's this kind of push up that can happen in the next push. And so for even in kind of like say like the absolute worst case scenario, I'm saying that let's use the far tails, like Bitcoin mining goes to zero, right? I use the example about in Ontario is that they would have to export the power out of the grid and pay people to take it. Right, because they had to find a home for it, right? And so I remember conversations at the time. They're like, "Why don't we just find like some toasters instead of selling it for $0? You just find toasters that you can just switch onto the toaster and collect zero, as opposed to having to pay somebody to take the power, right?" And so so Bitcoin mining in the absolute tail event is really fancy toasters that you can use for managing kind of this dispatching. So on the insurance products, right? They can
so even if they're mining Bitcoin at zero, they're still getting paid to take the energy
because they're providing that flexibility because they can be dispatched up and down.
That is a light bulb moment.
Yeah.
Fuck. Okay.
So as we get bigger, right? Like in 2017, there was maybe a couple thousand megawatts, right? So 2 gigawatts. So now we're at 12, right? And so now there's more flexibility. So imagine, kind of 4 years later, and we're at like making up a number like 60 gigawatts. And so those things are all providing flexibility. So the more it grows, the more that, this kind of flexibility can be provided in other systems that have this need as they grow more renewables into their system.
So there's like this careful dance though over time of building out the renewable infrastructure, enough ASICs being available to also be built, and the network and price will grow with that as well. There's like this dance between it all, but it feels like the Bitcoin network will grow with the growth of investment in the renewable infrastructure. It's kind of a little dance that's going to happen.
And if you can think about it as well,
Wild.
In so summer of 2020, you could buy 1 megawatt worth of S9s, which is like 700 miners. You could buy 1 megawatt for $14,000, right? And then at the time, an S19 miner was something like $2 million or $1.5 million or something. So you think about it's just like, to get your return on capital from that S19 miner, which is now $3.5 million, right, requires you to get between $50 to $100 back every single hour. But that S9 miner that was considered almost like e-waste, scrap, right, is that these wind facilities can do a one-time payment of like the infrastructure required to have some miner racks, right, and have the right type of electrical infrastructure. And so now they can actually buy these old gen miners when there's a downturn and say, we'll take those, right? Because it's not a very big capex.
They're toasters,
right? And it's better than me selling to the grid for -10. I'll take 0, or I'll take 12 or 20, whatever it is, right? It's obviously much higher than that, but so currently, Bitcoin miner is the buyer of first resort because it's paying more than the grid, right? But in the future, as more mining gets built out, the network gets a lot bigger, so you get to like 200 gigawatts. Mining can act as this buyer of last resort, right? So instead of actually injecting power to the grid at say -5, -10. Here's Bitcoin is saying $20 or $15. So it's almost like, and this is a bit of a mind trip, it's like it's setting a floor for energy around the world of saying anybody can put this up and there's always a buyer. Because if you think about like, if you put up like if somebody puts up a generation resource somewhere, it's got to be grid connected. There's no customer, right? But there's now always a customer.
This is what Harry said, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, interesting. I do this occasionally. I sometimes feel like Jeremy has a question. I knew it.
One concern that's starting to pop up in my mind is on the political front. I could see, is there a potential here where you mentioned two different types of, there's a lot of terminology flying around here, but the one where it's like retail driven, and then they have to cut off their machines that are less profitable. But then you mentioned another one where the grid operator has a direct like
Wholesale.
Like a shunt.
right. Is there a potential here where it seems like that would be the approach that the grid and political parties might want more so than the retail one, so that they can say, oh, no, power, like we need this. We're not going to leave it up to these banks or whatever who are running these mining farms. Is there a potential here where there's a political angle where they'd force, some sort of bill or something like that to force people to be retail or to not be retail and to be wholesale?
So there's, so right now is that there's no power that policymakers have over load on kind of like what's just and what's not, and you can't control it, right? And so like the message that I'm trying to kind of get out is that like Brad Jones, the ERCOT CEO, is saying like these can be a great asset for these grids in transition to kind of say that. So as you add in more renewables into your grid, right, is that you're losing control of part of your generation, right? And so like in the grid of the past is like loads, you can call them like dumb loads. So they need to be upgraded to smart loads. And saying like, you're going to lose control of your generation here, so you need to off balance and gain control of load, right? So it's like, and this comes into like the insurance part, right? Because it's like, and the importance of market signals, right? And saying like, as grids go through these transitions, there's more insurance products that are needed to manage this new problem, right? Because like, there was never this solar ramp problem in 1995, right? Like that's come up now. And so like the market signal is saying, hey, there's this high valued insurance product that is open to generation, open to anybody. It's an open, transparent market, right? And so the miners say this is like, and it's like, oh man, this is great because like as a miner, it's like I talked about like a generator says, I'm going to sell A, energy, or B, insurance, right? I can't do both because I have to turn down to sell the insurance. So these controllable loads have a very unfair advantage. It's not an A or B. It's going to say, I'm going to consume energy and simultaneously I'm going to sell you this insurance product because my opportunity cost is near zero because my behavior is not different, right? Like I wasn't limited on how much energy I consume, whereas the power generator is limited on this. So my opportunity cost is zero, whereas the opportunity cost for like a generator is saying, what is the value of selling energy versus ancillaries? Which one's to my benefit, right? So like a Bitcoin miner has the lowest opportunity cost to beat out all generation, which is providing a lower cost to consumers. So it's really self-serving in the sense that like for a Bitcoin miner is that I believe as time passes is that as they're getting bigger and having larger impacts, it's more obvious on where to go, right? Because as a Bitcoin miner, you have an objective function. It's I gotta minimize my all-in delivered energy costs. And so that's made of my cost of energy, my cost of transmission, my cost of distribution. How do I minimize those? And the perfect market is one that says I can buy low-cost energy and I can get paid for providing a high-priced insurance product because I'm going to buy this and simultaneously sell this, which means that my energy price is A minus B, right? And so it's going to, those market signals are drawing these miners to say, oh, you need help, right? Like, because I can see the price, right? So I'm going to move to you because you're giving me the right market signal. And as you get more renewables, that signal is going to get bigger. And so like they're going to naturally drive to these areas because of the markets that are created.